look at all that money, yeah, the money that they spend. Take another look now and take some time for hemp. I don't cut trees for paper, cause it hurts the environment. Stop deforestation, yeah, it's time for hemp. Whoa, an acre of hemp makes 20 barrels of oil. No need for pesticides to poison all our soil. People got no food, they got no clothes, they got no rest. Well, right now it's time for hemp.
Thank you for taking Time for Hemp. I'm your host, Casper Leach. You are listening to Time for Hemp. We are talking today to an interesting author and someone who knows quite a bit about medical cannabis and actually knows a lot about cannabis on a lot of levels. And if you haven't heard of him, you need to, and you need to pick up his book. His name is Dr. Joseph Rosado. Dr. Joseph, thank you for being our guest today, and I know you're very busy, so I really want to be very focused on our questions and let our audience know that I'm very grateful you took Time for Hemp. What got you interested in cannabis to begin with?
Well, thank you first and foremost for the invitation, Casper. It was great for you to reach out to me and accept this invitation. I got involved in cannabis as an advocate before I even got involved as an actual physician, if you would believe that.
Well, I can. Is it because you smoked it, or is it because somebody you knew about, or is it because of what you knew about it medically?
It's what I had learned about it in medical school, believe it or not. Even though only 10% of the medical schools in the United States teach on the endocannabinoid system or teach about medical cannabis, I went to medical school outside of the United States because medicine really was my sixth career. And by the time I had got into medical school, I was an old dog with a lot of tricks. And while in pharmacology, we were talking about the different receptors, and we talked about the endocannabinoid system very briefly and on the cannabinoid receptors, but then the conversation immediately twisted to how toxic it was and how devilish it was. But I went on and went home that evening and opened up the Pharmacology Bible, which is the book entitled, written by Goodman and Gilman, which is considered the Pharmacology Bible. And I looked up cannabis sativa, and there I read that it was used for medical reasons for centuries, number one. But secondly, that it had no physiological dependence. It didn't create a dependence like an opiate or like cocaine or anything else. And then I thought, well, there's some validity to this. And so I just put it in the back of my mind. And then in 2010, when medical cannabis became legal in Arizona, one of my very good friends reached out to me to ask me to be his medical director for a dispensary that he was wanting to set up, because that's what the law was or is in Arizona, that an MD needs to be the medical director for the dispensary. And we were all set to move forward with it, but life happened and we didn't pursue it. And then 4 years later, in my home state of Florida, I started seeing the advertising going on for the Amendment 2, the passing of Amendment 2, and the political campaign set forth. And I reached out to the individual that was in charge of the campaign and said, hey, I'm a physician, I'm an advocate, how do I get involved? And a week later, I was on the Bureau of Speakers, and the rest was history. So I began as an advocate before I became a recommending physician. And so it's for that reason that I created one of my companies, aside from being a practicing physician and an author and a public speaker on medical cannabis. I created a company called International Medical Consultants. And the reason for that is twofold. Number one, to support patients that don't have a physician that is familiar with or understands medical cannabis. And I provide support, not medical advice, because if I'm not licensed in their jurisdiction, I cannot, quote unquote, manage them, because that would be practicing medicine without a license, but just giving recommendations, suggestions, or letting them bounce ideas off of me. And the other is geared towards healthcare professionals, medical doctors, nurse practitioners, physician assistants that are wanting to get into the medical cannabis space but are fearful to do so because they've not had the training or the education. And so to educate them, but also to support them in any difficult, challenging cases. Like this morning, I received a text message from a physician in my community that they are managing a patient that's got a stage 4 GBM, or glioblastoma multiforme, which is one of the most aggressive brain tumors that there are. And the doctor reached out to me and said, I just got this new patient. I need your help because I have no experience in managing this type of a patient. I don't know what to do or how to do it. Can you help me? And so it's for those two reasons, to help the patients where they are unable to access a medical cannabis physician, and physicians that don't have the training or the experience that I've developed.
How do you look at this particular plant and go, wow, this is what it is good for, and this is what it can't do, without any help from science behind you?
That's a phenomenal question, and because I get asked that all over the world when I'm, on stage speaking to hundreds of physicians, and my response is pretty much the same throughout, and it's the following one. I've read and researched as much as I humanly can. I'm not saying I've read everything, but I've researched as much as I humanly can all of the writings that I could get my hands on the original pioneer, which is Raphael Mechoulam. So anything and everything that Professor Mechoulam has published, written, spoken about, etc., I've read, learned about, as well as his team of investigators. So in reading everything that they've written and everything that they've said, and their points of views on the endocannabinoid system and the different receptors and how cannabinoids work on these receptors, I've realized that cannabis is truly a magical plant, and it works on so many levels at so many different areas. And if it does you no good, it's not going to do you any harm, which is the beauty of it. Contrary to an opiate, contrary to an antidepressant, contrary to chemotherapy even, if it doesn't do any good for you, it's going to kill you, because every one of those, the side effects of those are far worse than sometimes the actual disease. Whereas with cannabis, to date, no one has actually died from using medical cannabis, or cannabis for that matter, unless, of course, they mix and match it with something else. So that being said, it's one of the few things that, as a physician that follows the Hippocratic Oath of first do no harm, it makes it really easy to recommend medical cannabis because I'm truly not doing any harm.
Well, I like that attitude, it's not, even if it don't help you, it's not going to hurt you. I don't think I've ever heard it put quite like that. We've had Dr. Mechoulam on as a guest on the broadcasting network, because I thought you'd find that of interest, since he's one of your heroes, and he is quite an interesting character to chat with. I just find him absolutely adorable, especially when he's off there. He's funny. He's got a very good sense of humor. You've been able to see with your own eyes, I am to assume, cannabis actually help in areas that standard medicine would not?
Yes, sir, very much so. Initially, we treat, in conjunction with. So we treat the patients where they are, because when a patient comes in, unless they are very motivated and they have some, emotional leverage, they have a hard time relinquishing or getting off of their traditional conventional medications. So we meet them where they are. And if they come in with whatever medication, we just add the cannabis to that. And then little by little, we begin the educational process where we begin to start weaning them off of, their conventional meds, and they start to realize, hey, I'm doing better without those than I was with them and just with the cannabis. And on a daily basis, I'm hearing patients discuss how they've dropped their pain medication to nothing at all, or maybe one pill on an as-needed basis once a week, once a month, or the children that are suffering with epilepsy, and their moms and their dads and I have worked a program out to where they're not taking 5 anti-epileptic drugs, but maybe 1 or 2, in the process of getting them down to, minimal to none. So it's another tool in our toolbox. But again, as Professor Meshulam and Professor Hanush have stated, cannabis is not for everyone. Cannabis is not going to heal or cure everyone, but it's worth, investigating and researching.
Well, now there's a variety of ways that people can utilize cannabis. Smoking it, they can take it in an oil, they can take it in a suppository. As a physician, which of those areas are best, do you think, for the patient to explore? Edibles, smokables, or suppositories?
It depends on the individual. For example, if I have a patient like my mother who's 80 years old and has never smoked a day in her life, not even a cigarette, then to discuss inhalation or smoking with her would be completely, non-productive. So in someone like her, I would move her in the direction or give her what she's accustomed to using. She's accustomed to taking medications for her blood pressure, so let's talk about a capsule. Or let's talk about a tincture, because she is a vegan and she's all about natural remedies and tinctures and oils and creams and topicals and ointments, etc. So I meet her where she is. She's not a smoker. She's never smoked, so inhaling is not an option. But let's talk about a capsule. Let's talk about a tincture. Let's talk about a topical cream. Now, if I have another individual that has experience with inhalation, then I look at the different modes of administration and how quickly they work. For example, if they inhale, someone is going to get their benefit within 3 to 10 minutes of an inhalation. The disadvantage is that it's only going to last 2 to 4 hours. So in those cases, I also have them do either an edible or a capsule or a sublingual oil to take simultaneously, because the oral ingestion is going to take anywhere between 30 minutes to 90 minutes before it kicks in, but the effects last anywhere between 6 and 12 hours, depending on how quickly they metabolize. So in combining a vape with an edible, now the patient is covered better and longer, and then they would use the vaporizer or the inhalation or the smokable on an as-needed basis, similar to the chronic pain patient that's given a long-acting opiate and then a short-acting opiate for breakthrough pain. The long-acting is given twice a day, and the short-acting is given every 4 to 6 hours. So I implement the same concept and use the same terminology that patients are accustomed to. So it's all about communicating with the patient, understanding what they do, what they have done, what experience they have, meeting them where they are, and then introducing my form of treatment with what they are used to.
Over the years in your practice, you've had to at least deal with a variety of different strains of cannabis, sativas and indicas. How do you know which is going to be a good thing for who and for what and for when and where and how?
Well, latest research and information that we've gathered is that pretty much everything that we've ever used is really a hybrid. So it's not so, so the reality is that it's more of a hybrid than a sativa, an indica, or a hybrid. Now, the hybrids do have sativa-like properties or indica-dominant properties, but the more I've learned and the more I've read and the more I've listened, I understand that it's really more the terpenes that, in conjunction with the sativa and the indica dominant, have more of the medicinal value. And what Meshulam has spoken about for years, and Ethan Rousseau has spoken about for years, about the entourage effect and how everything works in conjunction, kind of like an orchestra. It's a matter of finding the right combination of terpenes with the proper, hybrid that is going to work best for the individual. And because we take a very strong patient history, and we ask them, what have you been using? What products are working for you? And we listen to the patients. We make kind of like a little tickler file. So when we get another patient that comes in with similar circumstances, we will always say, well, in the past, our patients have pushed or promoted this product, or they've raved about this product or this dispensary. So we are able to eliminate the guesswork for the patient and direct them based on the experiences that we've gathered with, managing between 2,000 and 3,000 patients.
What made you sit down and think, I think I'll write a book? For two reasons. One, a lot of kids don't even know what a book is these days. They think a book is a Kindle. Hello. And two, writing a book is just a daunting task. And to sit down and make sure you get all your facts right, this right, that's indexed, and that's research, and that's covered. What made you sit down and take on a chore like that in between a busy medical profession?
Well, because I went back to when I started wanting to learn about the use of medical cannabis and using medical cannabis in my private practice, and I couldn't find anything that was directed to a physician or a patient. There were a lot of things available, but more for the advocate, but not so much for the actual patient or the physician. Now, I did purchase one book called The Handbook of Cannabis, which is, an A to Z, nuts and bolts from the plant, from growing the plant, male, female plants, all the way to treating diseases and conditions, and it's very referenced, but it's very dry. It's more like a medical book, that it's just dry reading. Now, someone like myself, I enjoy that type of reading, but the average person doesn't. And so I wanted to write something that was easily understandable, accessible, in a language that everyone could understand, with information that was cutting edge and pertinent.
When you decide to treat a patient with cannabis, there's got to be patients that you think to yourself, no, they should take cannabis, but I don't think they can handle it. Do you have anything like that ever sitting in front of you when you're trying to deal with it?
Very much so, and quite often, especially with the older patients that are very small, very frail, and, they are concerned because they'll come in and say, I don't want to get high. I know I'm going to need this, and I understand that it's a benefit to me, but I just don't want to feel high because I'm afraid to, be able to drive or function, or some of them are still, in the workforce. And so they were concerned about the possibility of not being able to be functional. And I always educate them and say, look, you're going to be medicated, you're going to be medicated, you're not going to be incapacitated. And I always, bring it back to them. Look, you're taking, hydrocodone with Tylenol, or you're taking oxycodone with Tylenol. Are you incapacitated when you take those? You take those and you drive. Oh, yeah, you're right. And I'm like, well, that's a drug like any other drug, so why is that different than cannabis? And so I reframe their minds, but I always understand that there is a possibility that it may be too much for them. And so we start low and go slow, the traditional mantra that has been taught for, decades, but also, start them with something more innocuous, like a high CBD, low THC ratio, and then build them up to something, a little higher based on their symptoms and on their feedback.
You have had a chance to see a lot of patients, and you've had a chance to deal with a lot of medical grief in the community. If you had a chance to sit down in front of Congress or in front of a group of community of non-believers who were just hell-bent on destroying this plant, what would you say to them?
What I've said in other countries, because I have been invited to Costa Rica, I've been invited to Mexico, I've been invited to Malaysia, I've been invited to Fiji, to speak to government officials, politicians, attorneys, lawmakers, and educate them on the benefits of implementing a medical cannabis program in their respective countries and communities to support their citizens. And what I usually speak on is I have a talk on the top 10 conditions that are seen in my practice that we use medical cannabis to manage and treat. So I don't hit them with endocannabinoid system. I hit them where they live. because at the end, and after I get through speaking on the top 10 conditions, I do an impromptu quiz and say, of those 10 conditions that I just mentioned, how many of your friends, family members, or yourselves suffering with any one of those 10? And 100% of the audience raises their hand, and I say, and it's for that reason that you must use this in your country to aid your population to be healthier and better.
Well, do you want to list the top 10 that you have here?
Yeah.
We'll do it like Dave Letterman. We'll do it like Dave Letterman. Are you ready?
I am.
The top 10 reasons why a person might consider using cannabis as medicine. Number 10.
Neuropathy, nerve pain, caused by diabetes, caused by chemotherapy, caused by HIV, AIDS medication.
Number 9.
Autoimmune disorders in the form of lupus, mixed connective tissue disorder. We're not going to mention rheumatoid arthritis or multiple sclerosis, but those are similar autoimmune disorders.
Number 8.
Epilepsy and seizures in adults and children.
Reasons why you might consider asking for cannabis for medical reasons. Number 7.
Cancer, all types of cancer, from prostate cancer, breast cancer, brain cancer. My first patient that I recommended medical cannabis to was a 35-year-old female with a stage 3 brain tumor that to this day is teaching yoga on the beach in New Smyrna Beach. And the second was a 15-year-old child that had a stage 4 head and neck tumor that had eaten out his jaw, his cheek, his eye orbit, his eye, the skull, and it was into his brain.
Oh my. Reasons to ask your doctor to be allowed to use cannabis for a number of reasons would be number 6.
Fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue syndrome of fibromyalgia, that chronic non-malignant pain that attacks and affects people. And for years, doctors have told patients that disease doesn't exist. You're full of shit. Fibromyalgia doesn't exist.
Number 5, the 5th reason why you might ask your doctor to allow medical cannabis as part of your regime would be
rheumatoid arthritis. Arthritis that's debilitating and deforming, causing a deviation or a movement of your joints so your fingers all move out towards your wrist. Primarily, in males and females that have been diagnosed in their early 20s and have been given a host of chemotherapeutic medications to treat cancer. But number 5 reason, rheumatoid arthritis.
Great. That just sounds like a lot of people would benefit from that. Number 4.
Parkinson's disease.
Number 3.
Crohn's disease, a condition that affects the gut, also an autoimmune condition, but you plan your life based on the number of toilets between where you are and where you're going to be, because you can either have diarrhea or constipation or a combination of the two.
And number 2, since you mentioned number 2, let's do a number 2 nicely.
Number 2 is post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, which under that umbrella we also include anxiety, depression, and insomnia. And who does not have any one of those 4 conditions? Who has not been in a bad relationship, a bad marriage, gotten a divorce, gotten broken up, been involved in some type of trauma in their life, auto accident, etc. So, to recap, number 10, neuropathy, nerve pain. Number 9, autoimmune disorders. Number 8, epilepsy seizures. Number 7, cancer. Number 6, fibromyalgia. Number 5, rheumatoid arthritis. Number 4, Parkinson's disease. Number 3, Crohn's disease. Number 2, post-traumatic stress disorder, to include anxiety, depression, and insomnia. And Casper, do your drum roll.
And, ladies and gentlemen, the number one reason to ask your doctor to allow medical cannabis to be part of your medical regime would be
chronic pain.
Chronic pain, ladies and gentlemen. Chronic pain. There you have it. The top 10 reasons to ask your doctor why or why not you might include cannabis as part of your medical regime. Thank you for tuning in. And doctor, we appreciate you helping us with our top 10 tonight.
Get your smoke on.
That was fun.
That was fun.
And doctor, that makes sense. When you sit down and tell that and share that with people, it's got to get a lot of positive responses then, right?
Exactly, because you're hitting them where they live. You're hitting them in, you're talking stories. You're hitting them with the reality of these are conditions that I have, my mother has, my wife has, my children have, my grandmother, my cousins, my aunts, etc. It touches everyone's life in some way, shape, or form.
Well, it reminds me of that Dennis Perone once said that all cannabis use is medical. And is that something that you believe?
It is. I truly believe that. When people talk about, recreational marijuana versus medical, I'm okay with medical but not recreational. My response is recreational is medical because everybody has the same receptors and they're self-medicating. They just choose to do it on their own because they've realized for all these years that's the only thing that works for them.
When I worked with Jack Hare, while he was on the road telling people about his book, people would pick up his book and find it was the type of book that you want to send to your congressperson. And I can't tell you the number of times people bought 50 or 60 copies of his book just to send one to this congressperson, one to that senator, one to that representative, one to that mayor, just to open up the minds of the community and open up the minds of politicians. And I'm sharing that with my listeners so if they're looking for a way to not only educate their doctors, but to enlighten their legislative community, this would be an excellent book to pick up, right?
Exactly. In fact, a few of my patients have done that. They've purchased 3 and 4 copies of my books to give to their family members. One actually gave a copy to the governor of the state of Florida. I don't know if he's read it yet, as well as other politicians in the state of Florida have gotten copies of my book, thanks to my patients.
And is your book available also on Kindle or audio for people who might prefer to listen to it while they're driving?
It is not on audio yet, but it is in Spanish. So it's both in English and Spanish, and it is available on Amazon. It's available in Barnes & Noble, and it's also available on Kindle.
Fantastic. That means everybody can have it at their fingertips by tomorrow morning if they want to get a copy of Hope and Healing. And your website?
The website is josephrosadomd.com.
And I encourage people to go there and let them know that they appreciate his hard work. Well, I want to thank you so much for being part of our family and joining us here on the Time for Hemp broadcast. And I'd like to have you back as a guest sometime in the very near future, perhaps be a joint host with some of our doctors. We can have
no pun intended, I'm sure.
Well, I've had a lot of fun having you on the show, and I have a lot of fun introducing someone like you to my audience. It has just been a blessing all the way around. So I want to thank you for opening up and being at home with us.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the invitation. I appreciate the hospitality. And I definitely look forward to being back on your show
Anywhere there's sound to be found on the internet, don't forget we are around, and the next time you hear me, you'll know that it's time for hemp.
Look at all that money, yeah, the money that they spend. Take another look now and take some time for hemp. I don't cut trees for paper, cause it hurts the environment. Stop deforestation, yeah, it's time for hemp. Oh, an acre of hemp makes 20 barrels of oil. No need for pesticides to poison all our soil. People got no food, they got no clothes, they got no rent. Well, right now it's time